Well, it has certainly been a long time since I have posted a video in this environment, and it feels great to be back. Ladies and gentlemen, in this video, I wanted to talk all about Dead City Episode 2 and how I felt about it, because this was kind of a more defining episode than the previous episode. Obviously, the pilot has to deliver, right? That's like the episode that makes people decide if they're going to come back for the rest of the series, so that one obviously had a different mission. Episode 2 has to deliver. It has to follow up on the promise that the show is worth watching. And did Dead City follow up on this expectation? I think absolutely. Dead City Episode 2 was a truly fantastic episode. This episode followed the premise of the backstory a little bit of the Croat, and we got to see a little bit of a dynamic between Maggie and Negan that we haven't really seen to this point. Most of the episode focused on the overall story that Negan only needed to be ruthless to save his people. The people that he was fighting for were the people that he was going to be ruthless for, if that makes any sense. So that was the kind of overall narrative. And then, of course, we have a little bit of a backstory of the Marshal who ends up getting trapped, and a little bit of a spoiler alert, he gets trapped and caught by the Croat, who basically ends the episode by saying, "You're safe now." So the Marshal is now with the Croat, which is going to make for an interesting dynamic, because obviously the Marshal is going to be interrogated into why specifically he's there, and Marshal is going to mention Negan, which is going to set up something really truly amazing. But what we got at the forefront of this episode was really a story about Maggie and Negan going further into the city right after that candlelight was blown out by that old woman. That old woman steals the bag, but basically, essentially, like, tells Negan and Maggie to follow her, and they follow her, and they lead to this group of people in one of the buildings. And in that group of people, they just so happen to get raided by the Croats group of people, and Negan ultimately saves the day at the end by using one of the Croats people as bait to do this really awesome Negan speech in classic OG Negan fashion. And really, he was the one who kind of saved the day. And within that, after that all happens, it's revealed to those new people that Maggie and Negan are really there to go after the Croat, and essentially they team up. That's the overall TLDR of the episode, and just really, this was definitely a short episode. Apparently, this one was only 39 minutes in runtime. It didn't quite feel that short as I was watching it, because I really was engaged in the story. I wasn't really paying attention to the time. But yeah, it was definitely quick. I just didn't think it was that quick. But what we got was quality from start to finish. There wasn't really one bad element of the story. I really liked the dynamic that they set up between Maggie and Negan in this episode, and how essentially Negan was trying to explain to Maggie why he did ruthless things. And what we got out of that development at the finale, when Negan did another amazing lineup style speech, we saw Maggie see him do that, and it opened a new perspective. Obviously, it was vicious, it was ruthless, and it just wasn't, it wasn't right on any front. Negan was clearly having fun, but what I think this episode did really well was set the tone that this is him. No matter where he goes, what he does, how many times he tries to say sorry, that is who he is. He is very animalistic in his way of doing things, and everyone around him, including him, needs to just come to terms with that. Yes, obviously, that meant Glenn had to die, and that meant other people had to die, but if you're on the saving side of Negan and you're being protected by Negan, that's a good thing. You know what I mean? So I think that episode really set an interesting dynamic between Maggie and as well as Negan, of course, and it really made for an interesting story. And yes, I know there's a lot of people out there that have already said they're not too much of a fan of this Maggie Negan saga. They feel like it's overplayed and all of that stuff. I do get it. I understand for a bit of time now this has been a big factor. I personally really like it though, so I can't say I have any sort of problem with that dynamic. I like seeing the furthering of that story, and I like seeing them grow as characters. Are they ever going to be best friends? No. They already settled that in season 11 of The Walking Dead. You could see they're already still going along that premise here. And what I really like about this show, especially this episode, is it solidified the fact that they're not really deviating from the characters at all. Some spin-off shows, and just some shows in general that have carryover with characters, like, for instance, a Jay and Silent Bob or something like that. But when the shows have characters that extend to other series, I absolutely despise when they change the trajectory and the development of a character in not the canon show, right? So like Dead City is not canon per se. I guess now it is kind of, but like The Walking Dead is the canon series. Dead City shouldn't really be altering Maggie and Negan. And I love that they're not doing that. Another example of that, Morgan Jones. He was solidified to be one way in The Walking Dead, but Fear the Walking Dead turned him into someone a little different, a character we hate more, even though I love Morgan, but he is way more hateable in Fear the Walking Dead than he was in The Walking Dead. And overall, I think this last episode of his, the final episode of Morgan Jones, really solidified something that is a cardinal sin of writing. You shouldn't be going around changing the way we perceive things about a character so drastically. Like the whole Clear thing with Morgan. They made it into like a superpower in season 8, episode 6. That's not the right thing to do. And I love that they didn't do that with Maggie and Negan in this episode at all. Everything they had felt very, very grounded in the real story. And I think that's one of the things that I like the most about Dead City so far, is it has maintained that same grounded feeling that The Walking Dead always did, even when it went a little bombastic with like the Whisperers and the Commonwealth story and stuff like that. Walking Dead's always stuck true to realism. Like, it's always felt like a humanity show. It's never felt like a sci-fi zombie show. It's always felt very real. Dead City, even though there's a couple goofy elements like the zip lining and all of that stuff, realistically speaking, it does feel very grounded. Even though I think that's a little goofy, it's also ultimately true that at that far into the apocalypse in Manhattan, you're really not left with many options but to create systems like that. Even though it's a little goofy to see on screen, it still feels real. This would have never worked in something like Fear the Walking Dead. Like, if they had brought Maggie and Negan into Fear, they would have just devoured those characters because the showrunners of that show do not know how to use a pen. Like, literally. I know this episode, or this review of this episode, is kind of turning into me comparing this to Fear the Walking Dead, but I don't really have too much else to say about the episode specifically, other than I genuinely loved it. I thought this episode was just as fantastic as the first episode, if not a little bit more, because this episode had some big shoes to fill from the pilot. The pilot, like I mentioned in the beginning of this video, obviously had a certain role. It had to blow us away, like it did. It got nearly 2 million views live, which is incredible, and it worked because a lot of the retention stayed. Clearly, this episode, the first episode, was really good, and then this episode followed it up very well. It was definitely a little bit slower paced. We got a lot more dialogue, and we furthered the narrative, which this episode needed to do, and at no point was it boring. At no point did I find any flaws really in it, I guess, other than the fact that it was 39 minutes, but whoop-de-doo, like, that's no big deal. But overall, I think this episode perfectly delivered on what it set out to do. And it's proving even more that this show feels very different from the other spin-offs we got. It kind of finally feels like, and again, it's really funny because I've always been kind of an opponent of these spin-offs. I've said many times that I do not care for them. But this is actually going really well, and I think this is a step in the right direction, a much-needed step in the Walking Dead universe. It's amazing how quickly your opinion could change about something, and I had a feeling this was going to happen. Look, to be fair, I've said many times, I hope I'm wrong. And I was wrong. I'm very glad I was wrong because this has kind of revitalized my interest in The Walking Dead. Fear never did that. The World Beyond never did that. Tales never did that, even though it came close because I love the idea of Tales. But those shows never did that. Dead City so far, even though it's only the second episode in, it is doing a phenomenal job of making me feel invested in The Walking Dead again. Again, I don't know if this is because it's recency bias, right? I don't know if it's just the fact that I love Maggie and Negan, and Negan's my favorite character ever, so just seeing him on screen is great and all that stuff. I don't know what it is per se, but really, I'm just fully back invested in The Walking Dead, and I feel like a deadhead again, even though that's a totally different thing. But whatever. The overall point is I'm loving it. I really am. There's not much else I could say about it other than that. I'm glad we're getting something like this. And I think it's funny on a side note. I saw this meme on Twitter. By the way, if you don't follow me on Twitter, I'm going to link it down in the description. I'm very active on Twitter. But regardless, I saw something on Twitter the other day where it was like when the fan favorite gets killed and its killer becomes the fan favorite. It's just really funny because that's absolutely true. I loved Glenn. And then Negan killed Glenn, and then I loved Negan, and Negan is my favorite character of the whole show, which is also crazy because he's in my least favorite parts of the TV show, The Walking Dead. I don't like anything after he got introduced into the show, but I loved The Walking Dead with him in it. If that makes any weird sense, like he stole The Walking Dead. It became the Negan show after season 7, which is awesome. I mean, look, I say I don't like it, but I love Negan, so I guess I do love it. I don't know. Regardless, I'm just glad this feels right. Everything here is just great. I can't wait for episode 3, and I can't wait to see how we wrap up this story. I'm liking this new group of people we've met. I'm liking the story so far. It doesn't feel ridiculous. It doesn't feel overly goofy or anything like that. It feels good. This just feels right, and I'm glad we're getting it. So yeah, that's been the review. Sorry, this is on the shorter side. I don't have too much to say about it other than it was a good episode. But yeah, with all that out of the way, thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know what you thought about it down in the comments. Be sure to keep it civil. Like this video if you didn't already, and subscribe for more. And with all that out of the way, once again, thank you so much for watching this video. And until the next one, I'll talk to you later. Peace out.